There's so much to cover during this course, but I know that the best part about taking a wine course is, well, tasting wine. So please pour yourself already a glass of wine and let's get started with the tasting. What do our senses tell us about wine? We've been tasting since we were born, but with time, we become used to certain aromas and practically don't even think of them anymore. They're just part of us. We've integrated them. For example, if you bite into a lemon, you know exactly what to expect and you know the sensation you will have in your mouth. If you eat some yogurt, you know it might have a bitter taste and leave your mouth with a bit of an oily texture. If you drink black tea, you know that your mouth will feel dry. So when we're tasting wine, we're trying to make a connection and to pull from our memory all the aromas, flavors, and textures that we already know. Tasting wine is all about putting our senses to use, in particular, sight, smell, and taste. Before we get started with the tasting, I want you to go to your resources section and pull up 2 sheets that I created for you. These resources will help you out a lot during this portion of the course. The first one is a wine color chart, and the second one is a flavor and aroma sheet. We are going to taste wine using 4 steps: observe, smell, taste, and reach a conclusion. The wine that I am tasting is a Pinot Noir from California, and you're probably tasting something different, but that's fine. The plan here is for us to be able to identify certain characteristics. So I'll identify them in this wine, and you'll do that with your wine. Let's get started. Observe. Let's start by observing the wine. This is clearly a red wine, but we don't want to just say red. Let's try to identify the hue. What is the hue of the color? So I would say this wine is a light garnet red. And you have your color chart that will help you identify the type of red or white that you have in your glass. Smell. When smelling wine, we try to pick up the aromas that are already naturally in the grape. Now, some people think that when they read on the label that a wine has aromas of berries and chocolate and smoke, etc., that the wine has these aromas because these elements were actually introduced into the wine. But that is not the case. These fruits, nuts, and other elements are not added to the wine. The wine simply has those properties, those characteristics from the fruit or the grape itself. Aromas are broken down into 3 groups: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Let's start off with primary aromas. Primary aromas. Now these are aromas of flowers, fruits, and herbs. All wines have primary aromas, and they come from the grape itself. Some of the flower aromas are, for example, violet, rose, chamomile. Some examples of fruit aromas are lemon, green apple, peach, strawberry, cherry, and so on. Some examples of herbs are mint, lavender, dill, etc. Secondary aromas. Secondary aromas are yeast, yogurt, cheese, vanilla, and coconut. Now, these aromas are aromas that the wine has acquired from the winemaking process. For example, a wine that was aged in oak barrels could have a vanilla or a coconut aroma. Not all wines have secondary aromas. Some might have very subtle secondary aromas. And again, this all depends on the winemaking process. Tertiary aromas. These are aromas that come from aging. Now, when the wine ages, it will develop some different characteristics. Aromas of fig, prunes, so more along the lines of dry fruit. So let's recap. We have primary aromas, which are mainly fruit and herbs, and these aromas come from the grape itself. Then we have secondary aromas, and these are aromas that come from the winemaking process. Examples would be butter, yeast, oak, vanilla, coconut. And then we have tertiary aromas, and these are aromas that come from the aging process. And these are aromas such as figs, prunes, and so on. Now, I know it can be very challenging to pick up a bunch of aromas from a wine, but the important thing to do is to focus on the things that you are smelling. That's why I put together that sheet for you. It's gonna come in handy. It's gonna help you identify some of the things that you might be smelling, but you're having a hard time picking it up. Okay, so now let's smell this wine. What am I picking up from this wine? And what are you picking up from your wine? So what I recommend you do, you swirl it a little bit. And the reason why we swirl it is because we want to make sure that it receives some oxygen. Therefore, the aromas will come out stronger. So we swirl it, and then we stick our nose in there. It smells so nice. Okay, so what I'm picking up from this wine is definitely some red fruit. I would say strawberry, cherries, but more dark cherries. And I get a bit of an herbal touch, maybe rosemary. And a bit of smoke also. So maybe a little bit of oak in the wine. Okay, so the strawberries and the cherries, dark cherries or black cherries, those would be primary aromas. The rosemary, that's an herb, so also a primary aroma. And the smoke, the oak, that comes from the winemaking process, so that's a secondary aroma. And I'm not picking up any dry fruit. I'm not picking up figs or prunes, as we mentioned. So I think this is a younger wine. And I'm not picking up any tertiary aromas. Okay, what about yours? I know it can be challenging to come up with a bunch of different aromas, but you don't have to. Just try to pick up 2 or 3 aromas that are really, really showcasing in that wine. So for example, if it's a red wine, you already know that it will more than likely have some fruit aroma. So you might have strawberry, it might have cherries, it might have blackberries. So try to make that connection. If it's a white wine, it'll probably have a citrus note, maybe lemon, maybe grapefruit. Now that's why I put together that sheet for you, because the aroma sheet will come in very handy. All you have to do is have it with you, swirl the wine, smell it, and go through the list. See what it reminds you of. Okay, let's keep on going. The next step is tasting the wine. And that is probably the best part of it all. So when you taste the wine, you get to confirm the aromas that you smelled, and you also incorporate some new ones. So tasting the wine, though, is not just about confirming the aromas, it's also about the mouthfeel. So how does it feel in the mouth? Now, let's practice tasting. Again, it's very simple, but there is a bit of a trick to it. So you might want to swirl it again. Just give it another smell. And then you're going to let it in, but you're actually going to let it dance around your mouth, like this. That was delicious. Now that you've tasted the wine, you want to identify certain things. The sweetness level, the acidity, the tannins, the alcohol, the body, and the taste, of course. Let's start off with sweetness. Sweetness is a measure of residual sugar left in the wine after fermentation. Okay, so let's recap. During fermentation, the yeast transform the sugar into alcohol. So the yeast eat the sugar and poop the alcohol. Once they're done eating all of the sugar and converting it into alcohol, the yeast dies. The winemaker, though, can actually stop the fermentation process before all of the sugar is converted into alcohol. If this is done, that residual sugar is left in the glass, and that is what we call RS. For this course, when we taste the wine, we are going to define whether it is dry, off-dry, or sweet. Now let's look at the definition of each one of these categories. Dry wine. Dry wine can have up to 1% residual sugar and be considered dry. It's actually very difficult to detect very low levels of sweetness in the palate. So if you're tasting a wine and your first reaction is, oh, this is a dry wine, it probably is. Off dry wine. Above 3% residual sugar, a wine will taste off dry or semi-sweet. So let's say you're tasting a wine and it's sweet, like a banana or an avocado. Then it's more than likely off dry. Sweet wines. Above 5% residual sugar, it is clearly a sweet wine. Now think of a caramel or honey. That's definitely sweet. Sweet wines are very easy to identify. Now this wine is definitely a dry wine. Now let's look at acidity. All wines have acidity. Think about biting into a grape. You'll notice it has some acidity. Again, all grapes naturally have acidity, therefore all wine naturally has some acidity. But acidity depends not only on the type of grape, it also depends on the growing region and the winemaking style. When we taste the wine, what we are looking for is the acidity level. Is it low? Is it medium? Is it high? Or maybe it's somewhere in between. And how do we know what it is? Okay, this is going to help you out. High acid. Think about biting into a lemon. You can feel the acid in your mouth. You can feel how your entire mouth becomes watery and you start salivating, right? So that is high acid, and that also happens with wine. Some wines, when you taste them, you can just feel the saliva rushing out. Medium acid. Now, think about biting a red apple. It's also acid, it also has some acidity, but it's much less. So in the mouth, it feels watery, but a little bit smoother. Not as much as a high acid wine where you just feel it rushing. This one, it's more subtle. Now think about a low acid wine. Maybe when you bite into a melon, it has some acidity. You almost can't notice it. It's extremely subtle, and it's a sensation that feels a little bit smoother in the mouth. That would be low acid. So in order to identify the acid level, you need to think, is this wine making me pucker a lot? Is it making me salivate? And I have a trick for you. And I'm sorry if it's a little bit disgusting, but here we go. Okay, let's swirl it again. Swirl the wine in the glass. Okay, and now we're going to go like this. Let's tilt our head forward. If you just feel the acid, how it's rushing out, and you're salivating, and if you don't close your mouth, you're actually going to have saliva falling off, that's high acid. If it's not that intense, and you can hold it in, it's medium. And if you just simply don't feel anything rushing out of your mouth, it probably has low acid. That's a tip. Sorry if it was a little bit disgusting though. Tannins. Let's talk about tannins. Okay, have you ever had black tea and noticed how your gums become dry, like really dry? Or you can have dark chocolate and it also gives you this dry sensation in your palate. So this dry sensation is produced by tannins. And tannins are found in dry leaves, grape skins, grape seeds, oak barrels, and yes, also in dark chocolate. In wine, the tannins come from the skin and the seeds of red grapes. White wines can also have subtle tannins, but that is only if they ferment with the skin of the grapes. Younger wines usually have more tannins because with time, the tannins actually soften. They become a little bit more subtle, more velvety. Tannins add a certain bitterness and astringency to the wine. And they are actually very important for wines that are meant to be aged. Some grapes naturally produce higher tannin wines than others. Some examples of high tannin grapes are Cabernet Sauvignon, Syrah, Nebbiolo. And examples of low tannin grapes would be Pinot Noir, like the one we're having now, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, and Tempranillo. And again, these are just a few examples. Now, how do we define whether a wine has high tannins, low tannins, medium tannins? Easy! How dry and astringent does your mouth feel when you drink the wine? So when you taste, you want to define whether the wine is on the higher spectrum of the tannins or on the lower spectrum of the tannins. Let's swirl it in our mouth and let's see how astringent it feels, how dry it feels on the palate. So I would say this wine, this Pinot Noir, it definitely has tannins, but softer tannins, velvety tannins. My mouth does feel astringent and it feels dry, but it doesn't feel overly dry. So I would classify this as a low to medium tannin wine. And again, you don't have to be exact about this, okay? Just do your best. Try to identify. Trust me, with practice, it gets easier. Alcohol. If you've had a shot of tequila, then trust me, you are familiar with the sensation of alcohol. All wine has alcohol. If it has no alcohol, then it is not wine. Simple as that. Now, all wine has alcohol, but not all wines have the same level of alcohol. White wines actually tend to have less alcohol than red wines. The average for a white wine is between 11% and 13% ABV, and the average for a red wine is between 13% and 16% ABV. Alcohol cannot be tasted. It's something that is perceived. We feel it. And the way we feel it is as a warm sensation. And you can feel it maybe in the back of your throat, sometimes even in your chest. So that is alcohol. And when we are drinking wine, we also want to identify what the level of alcohol is. Is it a higher level, maybe a 15-16% alcohol? Or is it a lower level, maybe a 13% alcohol for a red wine? Or maybe a 11% alcohol for a white wine? Wines that have more alcohol also feel fuller, with more body in the mouth. If the wine feels and tastes lighter, with no heat or burning sensation, then it's probably a medium or low level alcohol wine. Now, you do not, again, have to be exact about this. Let's just have fun and try to figure out what's the alcohol level. Okay, I actually haven't checked what the alcohol level is of this wine, I promise, but let's give it a try. Maybe I'm close. Doesn't have a lot of heat. I don't feel that burning sensation. It's definitely not a high alcohol level wine. I might be cheating a little bit because I do know that Pinot Noirs tend to be lower alcohol. It is a Pinot Noir from a New World country, so they tend to have higher alcohol. I am going to go with a 13.5. And I really don't know, so maybe you can see that. 13.05. I was close though. Body. Now that you understand the tannins and alcohol in a wine, it will be much easier to understand the body of a wine. The body of a wine is essentially the combination of everything you taste and feel in your mouth. A wine with a full body will feel heavier in the mouth. It will have more complexity, more viscosity, and more structure. It will be a bigger wine. Let's compare it to milk. Think of a full body wine as whole milk, and a medium body wine like a 2% milk. They both have body, but of course it's different. One has more viscosity, one is fuller and bigger, and the other one is lighter. This wine, Pinot Noir, has a light body, and most Pinot Noirs have a light to medium body. Flavors. So we've reached the last step. Now all we have to do is confirm that what we smelled is also what we taste. So let's give it a shot. So we said this wine smelled like strawberries and black cherry, and I also picked up some rosemary. Okay, now let's taste it and see what type of flavors we have in the palate. I still taste the cherries, I still taste the rosemary, but I also taste a sweet spice, maybe like a white pepper or cloves. So see, I confirmed the aromas that I smelled, and now I'm adding some more, the ones that I'm also tasting. What about your wine? And the last step, now we just have to put it all together, reach a conclusion. This is a light colored Garnet wine. It is dry. In the nose, it smells beautiful. It smells like strawberries and cherries and rosemary. In the mouth, it has, I would say, medium to high acidity. It has soft tannins, low alcohol. It's a light-bodied wine. And then once you taste it, it also tastes like cherries and rosemary, but it also has a sweet spice. This is a beautiful wine.